What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is a hospitality veteran who works to create a seamless end-to-end guest experience, the physical brand design, and the overall global brand strategy for her brands. Recently recognized as a 2024 winner for Hotel Management's 40 over 40, she is driving forward a new line of hotels focused on mid-scale conversion. She's the Vice President of Avid Hotels, Atwell Suites, and Garner Hotels at IHG. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Gilbride. Welcome, Karen.
Hey, Dan. It's always great to get reminded you're over 40.
I know. I've actually never heard of the 40 over 40. I've always heard of the 40 under 40. So let's celebrate that in our wisdom.
Right. I was like, can we just be 40 people doing good things? Right. You know what I mean? But it's okay. We can celebrate. And I'm in the 40, well over 40 category, but always nice to be recognized. So thanks for that reminder.
I'm writing that down because I feel like I've always toiled with like doing some kind of an awards thing for hospitality. I thought it would be really fun. But 40 people doing good things sounds like a good one.
Yeah.
Let's just recognize, lower the barrier and just recognize all the good things.
Yes, all the good things.
Well, I'm really excited to hear and get to know you, but also to hear about the three brands that you're championing. And before we get into that, I want to ask first what I ask all of our guests is, what does hospitality mean to you, or how do you define it?
Yes. Well, and this is like the ethos of your podcast. So certainly was thinking about this and ready for it. And as somebody who truly considers hospitality, like not just a thing or a feeling, but like kind of like my life's calling too. It's a really great question. But when I think about hospitality, truly, I kind of close my eyes and it really is a feeling. It's when you go to, your closest friend's house, a family member's house, and you're open that door, you're crossing that threshold. And it's just that feeling you get when somebody is opening their arms to you, opening their home to you, offering you, hey, let me grant your coat. You want something to eat, you want something to drink. It's warm, it feels inviting. Like hospitality to me truly is a feeling. And it comes to life in a lot of different places. But I think it's when I close my eyes, it's that feeling you get when you get somewhere where that just feels open and warm and inviting. And I think every day we're just chasing that feeling, right? In hotels of making people feel like that in a space where it isn't always people they know. So that's when I think about hospitality.
And that resonates with me so much because through so many of these conversations, it's one of those things where it's, you know it when you feel it, right? When it's done well, right?
Yeah. When it's there and when it's not there, right? You just know it, right?
Yes. And another thing that really struck me in getting to know you is oftentimes, brands have incredible power, right? And they have such a halo of value that they can add. And really, branding is everything. And what's really interesting about your journey, well, there's a couple of things, but like the one that rose to the top was that you defined yourself as a hotel person who actually accidentally became a brand person, whereas most people, they're branding gurus that are like, wow, hotels are really awesome. And let me go into this and see how we can distill out this brand to a fully immersive experience. So how did you accidentally become a brand person?
Well, accidentally might imply like you fell into it when actually it's been a long career of falling into it over time. But I've actually been with IHG, so probably not a surprise now after the 40 over 40 intro here, but I have been with IHG for coming on 24 years. And honestly, I've always known since a very young age, my father told me, I looked at him on a family vacation in the hotel and I said, I'm going to run one of these one day. And, he's like, I thought, whatever, grab your coat, we're late. What are you doing here? He's like, but it's always stuck with him that over time from 5 years on, I was more interested in how the hotel worked than being at the hotel. Like I was always trying to peek into the behind the scenes, like, when the housekeeper would open a cupboard or something and you try to see like, oh, what goes on back there? Like, where did I store all of the things? Like, I was always fascinated by how an actual hotel worked. And so, over time, my parents, my mom was a teacher, my father sold cars. So, they're like, all right, what if you really want to do this, let's find a path to do it. And I did an internship at the local Holiday Inn when I was 15. And so I started working behind the front desk at 15 and just fell in love with it. I love the 24-hour rhythm of a hotel. Like the fact that it resets itself every 24 hours. It's like a new chance to delight a whole new group of people, to make a whole new pot of money, to fill those rooms. There's the competitive nature of how that happens. And so I just really fell in love with that rhythm of what a hotel, and working with so many different people. It was the first time I grew up in Buffalo, New York. And it was the first time I was around just like lots of different types of people, everybody contributing and working as a team. Like I'm a team sport kind of person, and there is like no better team sport than a hotel, right? How
Yeah.
everybody leans in and kind of works together. So started doing that, then went to hotel school. And after hotel school, I got my first role with what was Bass Hotels and Resorts at the time, which then
Oh,
became
wow.
Six Continents and then became Intercontinental Hotels Group and IHG. And here we are today. So yeah, and I started at the Intercontinental Park Lane in London was my first job with the company.
Really?
And so, yeah. And so I've seen lots
I've
of our
been
different
there.
brands. I've seen the company evolve, but like always kind of a thread through that. So, but went from
Well,
on property operations into global HR, then into brand marketing. So it's been to your question about paths and how I fell into branding. It kind of went through a lot of different places and spaces within the company.
I'm going to call it falling forward, right?
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, definitely falling forward. Definitely
I
falling.
also I love that you're from Buffalo as well, and I love that you bring up team sports because I just want to say thank you to Scott Norwood again
Oh,
for
no,
what
Dan.
was he wide left or wide right? But that I remember that was a very formative year for me with the New York Giants, and thank you.
It's wide right, and it struck again this year in us trying to get to the Super Bowl again. So I will always champion an underdog, is what I also say, because of growing up in my formative years in Buffalo. You got to keep believing, you got to keep trying, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. Um, Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
We always, hey, we always still think about Scott and wish him well. It wasn't his fault. There were a lot of other plays that were missed along the way. And so again, coming down to team sport, never blame one person, right?
right, laces out. Um, so I want to go back to something you said when you were describing some of the exciting things about hospitality and the idea that it resets every 24 hours. Especially, I think a lot of hotel um, owners and also just real estate finance
Yeah.
people really love that 24-hour reset because it's a hedge against inflation, unlike many other long-term leases and all of
Yeah.
these other things that happen. And and also just speaking to you and learning more about um, Avid, Atwell, and Garner, where
Yeah.
you're trying to convert existing hotels into these brands. Um, there's this whole idea of ROI, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if I were an owner of an existing hotel, like what's the big draw to convert to one of your
Yeah.
three brands?
All brands. So, and if we think about the three brands that I lead, so IHG has 19 brands now since we launched Garner. Some of them are ripe for conversions and some are more focused on new construction. So, in the three that I have the honor of leading right now, Avid Hotels is new construction. So that is our brand that sits in the lower mid-scale space, and it is all about the basics done exceptionally well at a fair price, but it is really for the guest that is looking for that ruthlessly consistent experience each time that they stay at that property. In the conversion friendly space, we launched Garner Hotels just last year because we
Mhm.
had Avid from a new construction play in that lower mid scale, but we didn't have a brand that was more conversion friendly that delivered that offer, to your point, from an owner ROI perspective in the lower mid scale. We have Candlewood Suites, which can be converted, but that is a true extended stay hotel. So think about kitchens and all of that. We didn't have something that sat in the transient conversion in that lower space. So we launched Garner. And if I think about it from an owner perspective, especially now, things are getting, I would say, better with inflation, with financing, but not the best, right? So it still is challenging for owners to get at the amount of capital that they may need in the new construction space. And if I have an asset or I see an asset that's for sale, it's already physically built. I'm going to compress that construction timeline. I'm going to compress that to a shorter amount where I can actually be open and be transacting in this new brand. And a lot of owners that are interested in a product from IHG is because they may be with another brand, but they don't believe that they're getting the enterprise contribution or the strong access to the loyalty program, the loyalty guest that IHG has with IHG One Rewards. So quite honestly, a lot of our owners were saying, I would love for you to have a brand in the space that we can convert because I've got some hotels that I would love to be punching up into one of your brands and delivering an even stronger ROI for them. And our One Rewards guests, we're also saying, hey, when I'm traveling and it's just a 1 to 2 night stay, I need to get in, need to get out, I want a quick hot breakfast. I don't have something in that space from you either. So it really felt like a win-win on the guest side, on the owner side, and a sweet space where we do really well
Mm.
as IHG. And so a lot of reasons why conversions are a huge part. It was about 30% of our openings and signings last year alone, continuing to see a lot of strength in the conversion space. And that's not just within IHG. And I also think there's something from a sustainability perspective, right? Like an asset is there and it exists rather than just demolish. Is there a way that you can renovate that and give it breathe in new life, right?
Mm.
Into that hotel, into that asset. And we have found with the first 4 Garners that we've opened, absolutely we could. And so it's been great to see that. We just opened hotel number 4 on Thursday in Clarksville, Tennessee. So
Oh,
just
wow.
outside of Nashville. So we went on sale in September, opened the first properties in December, and have just been continuing to bring them online since. So it's been exciting.
So one thing also that I noticed, and you're just to paint a picture for everyone right now, where
Yeah.
are you sitting right now?
Where am I sitting right now? So I'm sitting in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm sitting in a giant warehouse that we have that's on the outskirts of Atlanta. And this is where we do all of our innovation and our product design. So I am sitting physically now in one of our Atwell Suites guest rooms. So we build out for all of our mainstream prototypical brands as we're designing that new prototype, how it's going to look, how it's going to come to life. We start that work here at the design center at our warehouse. And we honestly start first from like foam core, just getting the shape and dimension of the room right. Where would we place furniture? How do we get customers walking through and telling us if we have enough space between the desk, between the bed, between the couch? And then we keep building up levels of fidelity until you get to what you see here, which is a ceiling, a floor walls, drywall, a air conditioning unit, everything but a working toilet. And I remind
Mm.
that of people when they come to the design.
Yes.
those are outside of this room, but
Don't
we
get
have
too
the
comfortable.
bathroom. We have the bathroom, but don't get too comfortable within the space. Yes, but this is an Atwell Suites room.
Okay, because in the what segment did you the lower upper mid
Lower mid scale. So we're within
lower
the
mid
mid
scale?
scale. Yeah.
So oftentimes when people stay at a lower mid scale, it's the design and the experience is all over the place. And I remember in speaking with you,
Yeah.
you used the words, it's really like this democratization of design. And you also
Yeah.
lit up as you were talking about it. Okay. And
Yeah.
I assume that's you becoming the accidental branding person, but there was also something deeper in there. And as a lot of the listeners to these podcasts are designers and architects
Yes.
and
Yes.
other people who care about that within the world of hospitality, like walk us through that democratization and why you lit up so much from the hats that you're wearing.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. One, and we've talked about this and you've talked about it on your podcast before, but when you wear a brand hat, I do have to think about two separate customers. There absolutely is the guest that's checking into one of these brands any night, right? That 24-hour cycle that we talked about. And I have to think about, am I building a brand that fits the needs that that guest has for their physical needs within the space, but also like how they want to feel when they're in that space, how they want the design to feel. And that's one set of needs. And you absolutely have to balance that with an owner who's the other guest. I never get a guest to check into the hotel if I can't find an owner that wants to build and invest in that brand. We are a franchise driven organization. So it is partnering with owners and investors who want to build these brands. And in order to make that work, I have to make sure the economics and the ROI are strong for the owners. And I believe that for a long time in the hotel space, people, guests, owners had this idea that if it looks really nice, if it looks well designed, well thought of, it looks like something I might put in my own home. Wow, that must be expensive. And that's too expensive for me to put into the hotel or to invest in it. And I think what we've done at IHG over the past, call it 8 to 10 years, as we've really been fine tuning our design process, using things like our design center warehouse, bringing owners involved in that design process, owners and guests coming in and really helping us to do that. We've been able to marry those two things and really show that good design is accessible, should be accessible, and everybody at every price point deserves to come into a space that feels like something that they're worthy of. And that democratization is just that. It doesn't only, if I pay an Intercontinental or a Kimpton price, should it look good? Should it feel good? Should it have design? We've shown at Avid Hotels in the lower mid-scale space, at Garner Hotels from a conversion, Atwell Suites. We've shown across all the brands that that can exist. The two
Mm.
are not mutually exclusive. They absolutely can exist, and they actually help each other. If the guest likes the experience better, they're going to stay more. They're going to talk about it more. They're going to post about it. It's going to bring in more guests. And so I just think the teams here, and when I talk about the teams, it's not just my team from a brand perspective or a brand design team. It's our architecture, design, and construction teams, our interior designers. Every day, we're challenging them to hit a price point from a budget. Like, here's how much you have to spend on that mirror. If it goes above that, you got to find that somewhere else. It's kind of
Mhm.
like designing your own house. I'm sure you've done a renovation at some point in your house. There's a
I'm
budget.
I'm more like the shoemaker's kids with no shoes. But
You've never done it. Okay.
I do
Well,
it all day, every day, and, like,
yeah,
when it comes to my own world, I'm like,
yeah.
"Ugh, I can't handle it."
Simplistic, right.
Yeah,
But it's like, it's easy to go over budget on your own house too, because you just, oh, I see that and I like it. I see that and I like it. I
mhm.
keep adding. So we have to
There's a
be
creep.
really thoughtful about that. And our teams have
Mm.
done a really good job of managing that push and pull and making sure that the costs don't go overrun, but we still deliver a design. Atwell Suites, this is in the mid-scale space and the upper mid-scale space, hybrid suites. But if you even look behind me, this artwork wall shows up in every Atwell Suites, but there's going to be one or two different things at each property that's a little bit custom to that location. So there might be a Morse code message that resonates because you're in Miami versus being in Austin. But we can do it when you do like small tweaks of customization across a big program. You're able to infuse that and you're able to help the guests get curious about it too. So it's finding a couple of things that matter to the guest that don't break the bank, but still engage that customer and what the brand is and what the experience is. And so that does excite me.
And earlier in your career, you said you were at the Park Lane, correct?
Yeah, yeah, the Intercontinental Park Lane in London.
And that's a luxury property, and what's
Yeah,
interesting is I feel a lot of brands on the in kind of like the lower mid-scale space over the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years in the US
yeah,
have been investing in that democratizing design, if you will, just steal
yeah,
from you.
yeah,
I find in Europe before all of that, that was I would stay at some roadside motels, and they were very thoughtfully uh, designed. And I was like, wow, this is actually really cool. Why isn't that happening here? What did you bring from your luxury experience in at the Park Lane as you came back to the U.S. and kept falling forward?
Yeah. And I have to steal that falling forward, right? Never back. I think everything, every career, it's a building experience, right? So I think what I took from that experience is attention to detail. So it doesn't matter how many details there are, there's more in an environment like an Intercontinental. But that experience of working on property, and my role at the time was I was the training manager for the entire hotel. So I had to train every new colleague that came in across a myriad of different things. But it gave me exposure and experience to every team member, every department, and how the entire experience came to life. And I realized that it really is about high attention to detail and standards, being clear about what the standards are, training people against it, and then executing. You then
Mhm.
translate that to any level of hotel. There's just maybe the complexity looks a little bit different, but I've taken that for me, whenever we are looking to build a new brand, I step back first and you say, okay, well, what's the level we're trying to reach? What are going to be the standards we care about, right? What are the most important things based on the guests that are coming in, where this hotel is, what it's serving to meet? And then how do we make sure we can then execute those standards through how we design the hotel, what we put into the hotel, and is it meaningful? So I think that's a big piece when I look back about that time period was I truly saw that in order to make an experience like that come to life every day, you have to be extremely intentional and explicit about the standards, why they matter, what they are, and then execute against that flawlessly. I don't believe that only happens in luxury. I think that, when we looked at building Avid Hotels, it was going to be about the basics, but as I talked about, it's the basics done exceptionally well,
Mm.
consistently. And so you have to make sure if you're only going to do five things, how are we going to knock those five things out of the park? And so for that brand, we said, all right, the most important thing is the sleep experience for that guest. So we spent our time and energy saying, how could you take an efficient room, but really make, and if it's new construction, how could you make sure that the soundproofing was done right? You had a blackout curtain that works. You've got the best possible mattress. So it's like, how do you show intentionality of those standards that matter for that experience? So whether it's luxury or it's lower mid scale, I think it's kind of zeroing in on that.
So this is really surprising to me because oftentimes when you talk to someone who is more focused or has come up through operations, um, and you start talking about design, and there's a spectrum of people on
Right.
operations, but more often than not, having done custom guest rooms in the 3 to 5 star range for 20 something years, I'm always like a little nervous, like at the review when someone from operations comes in, because if it's more often than not, well, maybe more than half the times, if they had their way, it would be a stainless steel box that you could just hose out and just had drains everywhere, and it wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, let's just
Um,
close it down. Yeah.
yeah, just hose it down because we gotta be efficient and all these other things. But I'm very surprised, and you're not alone in this coming from the management side, but I'm really surprised at how much you light up when you do talk about the design elements. How did you was that always there?
Yeah, because I think so. One, I light up talking about anything related to hotels is probably that, but I do think you can balance the two, and they don't have to be against each other. Of operations, owner, and guest, right? Like you can have that balance. How we try to do it through design is like I'll use the example of the design center. So in addition to having guests come through, owners come through, et cetera, because sometimes owners will absolutely admit they've never actually worked in their hotel or, kind of done that role. So you have to understand, am I talking to an owner operator or an owner investor, right? And so we will want to make sure that we have all three lenses when folks come through, but we will also bring staff members from our local hotels here in Atlanta to come and walk through the spaces and just point out the things that are really small but meaningful to how they have to do their job. So if you go into the Avid guest room, cleanliness in that lower mid-scale space is super important because most guests told us in a lower mid-scale hotel, a lot of times there's great hotels out there, but the brands overall don't feel as clean, safe, secure. So we thought, how could we put in some of these what we called confidence cues? How can
Mm,
you make sure that the guest sees from a design perspective, we hear you and we're actually going to over deliver on that cleanliness experience? And so in the guest room, and again, this is a value you can do when you're going in a new construction environment is you have a clean slate, right? It's a clean palette. All of the surfaces within the guest room, you can completely get that Swiffer underneath every corner. There's no crevice. So like the guest knows I don't have to get down on my hands and knees and look for anything scary. The housekeeping team knows that they can get into every nook and cranny and every corner. It's those small things, but like the guest sees that. They're like, oh my gosh, there's nothing under the desk. Like there's nowhere for things to hide. They've completely thought about my fear in a lower mid-scale hotel of finding something or something going under the bed. And like I'd have to go under and get it. So you're kind of using design to help create some of those cues that are then making the guests see what they need and what they want from the experience. So we're using the teams as well, like from an operations perspective, to come in and help us to deliver that. Or if it's something small, Dan, one time in one of the designs, this small side table, it was just unnecessarily heavy. And your housekeeping, they come in and they're trying to move it and they're like, how am I ever, I'm never like, just heads up, I'm never cleaning behind this because I can't move it. And you're like, thanks for telling me. And also cost wise, if I strip the weight out, I can probably get that cost down. So it's like, it actually is a win-win, but something that you might not notice if you're not the person who ever had to move the table.
mm. Um, I'm intrigued by this idea of confidence cues, and I hear it like using the Swiffer example,
Yeah.
and maybe dealing with weight of furniture. Um, what are some other ones that you have to? Because that's more on cleanliness. You said cleanliness and safety. Like, what are some other
Yeah.
confidence cues that that you're proud of that you've developed?
Yeah. So if I think about again, and this is important in that mid-scale space where sometimes guests can say that just over time, those brands have not consistently delivered what they've been looking for. And I
Hmm.
say that consistently in the brand level because there are absolutely hotels knocking it out of the park, but they'd say overall it's been tough for me to find a brand that I trusted consistently. And that's really what we're trying to do with Avid Hotels, with Garner Hotels. I will say it's something as small as lighting, Dan,
Mm,
provides a huge amount of confidence. And so if you look at the outside of an Avid hotel, we specifically designed that prototype to have a corner entry that has two sides of storefront glass. And that is because at night, if I'm driving into the parking lot, normally what you'd see in a hotel that's more center loaded in that space, I have just one sliver of the door that goes in and I maybe see someone's back there, right? This means all the light is emanating out through almost two sides of the parking lot. So I'm a
oh,
guest driving in at night alone by myself. It's a small queue that I see a lot. I see the front desk. I see it right through the glass. I see the person that's there. I know exactly where to get to. We also took the red stair tower of Avid. Literally, our brand color is confident red, is what we call it. Because as I'm driving down the highway, I want to see that red stair tower. I want to see that big Avid logo, right? With a check mark as the V. And I'm
mm,
saying, check, I found that hotel that I'm trying to get to. So some small cues in the signage, in the lighting, also corridor lighting. We were intentional about guest room corridor lighting, even in the conversions of Garner hotels. The team will walk the space and make sure that it's throwing off enough lumen, enough light that it doesn't feel when I come off that elevator that you don't want it to feel like a hospital, right? That's where you balance the temperature and the lumens and things like that to make sure it's got a feeling of approachability. There's that fine line between a hospital and but when it's dark and I can't see down that, it's not making me feel welcome in an inviting space. But I want it to feel again like a good confidence, that's another confidence cue that we use. So I'd say lighting is probably one of the more underestimated deliverables in a design space. Not our team is thoughtful. I mean, I'm sure a lot of teams are, but you then over time get an owner or a hotel that just changes out the lights, right? And might not notice that you really changed an environment. So we're really thoughtful about how the lighting can be used to direct guests to what you want them to focus on, what you want them to see, and also how you want them to feel in that space.
that's fascinating, and I love the idea of being able to drive up and see what's going on. Like it's almost like you're in a it's like a jewel box, right? You're
Yeah.
seeing there, and then you can think about your next steps, whether you're dropping your
Yeah.
stuff off, whether you're driving around. But
Yeah.
oftentimes, like I can't tell you how many times I get back somewhere super late or the flight's late, and I don't know. I'm oftentimes not concerned so much about my safety, but I can imagine how other people
Yeah.
are, and I just kind of go through not thinking. But it's nice that other people are thinking about that
Well, in
for all
smaller
of us.
towns too, I mean,
Mhm.
you might be traveling in more larger towns, but smaller towns, there's less people. Single female travelers will tell us, you know what I mean, wanting to know that there's somewhere that I can, pull straight up. I can see. Maybe I leave the car up front. It's just you're eliminating any questions, right? Or
Yeah.
kind of making again when we talked about hospitality. How do I make somebody feel safe, welcomed, and in a place that is for them? From the time they start interacting with the hotel, which honestly, in a lot of these hotels, is I'm driving. So am I
Mm.
seeing that as I'm coming towards the building? And is it making me feel like I've made the right decision and it's somewhere I actually want to lay my head down?
Well, that's a whole other question. But then you've solved that with just getting into all the nooks and crannies. So
Yeah.
there
Yes.
we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Entire
uh,
well, it's the journey, right? The journey of it. Absolutely.
uh, on a side note, I was just at a hotel that I did. It'll remain nameless, but it converted into a migrant hotel in New York City. And I just went to go walk a whole bunch of the rooms. And the housekeepers are doing the best they can, but there's some people who just they're just living. They're like it's like a single resident occupant. And we went into some of those rooms. It's
Yeah.
pretty. There were lots of nooks and crannies. Okay, so another thing that comes up in this in these conversations is really okay. I started down one path, and then just to steal what I threw at you before, I fell forward into another path I didn't know existed. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, an intriguing thing about your journey is aside from being a hotel person that became a brand person,
Yeah.
um, you went to Cornell. And then was
Yes.
your first in the hotel school, was your first job going out to London in the Park Lane?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
The first role after Cornell. Yes.
After Cornell, okay, because when you were younger, you
Yep,
were living that life.
I was
Okay.
at the franchisor of Holiday Inns and Holiday Inn Expresses in the Buffalo area. And that owner happened to be one of the original handshake, dealings with Kemmons Wilson on one of the first Holiday Inns. So Hart Hotels out of Buffalo. And he was the one, Mr. Hart, God rest his soul now. He's the one who, like, I came home one summer and I was working in their corporate office in HR and also working at the front desk. He said, well, what do you want to do after Cornell? And I said, I don't know. I said, I did study abroad when I was at Cornell in London and I really liked it. And he's like, well, Bass that owns Holiday Inn, they're based there. Let's call
Yeah.
them and get you over there. And I'm like, oh my God, Mr. Hart, what are you doing? But it goes to show you that you never know what connection is going to unlock a different door. And who would have thought this, front desk job in Buffalo, New York would open a door for me to go from that to an Intercontinental Park Lane and then onward from that. So, I say it to folks because it's like one in this industry, in any industry, but I'd say this industry in particular, which is heavily relationship driven, like never burn a bridge because that
Mm.
bridge is never down. Like you'll see that person again. And so it's like thinking about how you manage your own brand, your work ethic, et cetera. And so, I gave my all to that job. And luckily he was willing to put in a phone call for me to vouch for me and try to go forward with my career and I was excited about that. And after New York, after London at the Intercontinental, I stayed there about 2 years. And when my visa was up, I moved to the Crowne Plaza in Times Square, so
Oh,
into
wow.
Manhattan. And so I did about 5 or 6 years based at that property before relocating to the corporate office in Atlanta in a global human resources role before getting into brand. So,
Wow. So operations, HR to brand. And I was really struck by something you said earlier in like, well, some of the feedback that we get and
yeah,
many of the guests that we have, they're on this one path and then they're like, oh, I
yeah,
didn't know I could do this other thing.
yeah,
And we all have limiting beliefs, right? We all think, okay, we're on this path. This path is cut through some shrubberies and
yeah,
we got to go here. But there is a way to find another path. And you used to think that
Sure.
a general manager, and you were gunning for that, was the highest
Yeah.
that you can go, which is a great position,
Oh my God.
especially
Yeah.
if you love travel and hotels and
Yes.
hospitality. But you broke through
Yeah.
that, or you got out your
Yeah.
machete and went and kind of found a different way through the shrubberies. So
Yeah.
walk us through that decision making process. Like, you have Mr. Hart that got you out to London. And
Yeah.
then, like, what were the other,
Well,
I guess, the
yeah. I
other
mean,
people, experiences, ideas that helped you kind of find and forge a new path?
yeah. I mean, I think it's a collection of all of the above, right? People, experiences, ideas, etc. But um I will say it's yes, I thought when I, from 5 years old that I wanted to run a hotel. I thought that was the highest, or what the pinnacle was of a hotel, is the person who runs the hotel. Maybe you just go to bigger hotels and bigger hotels, but that's where it stops, right? Because you are the leader of this little civilization. Like every hotel is its own kind of thing. And so I thought that that's what that was. And I loved my time in operations. I never actually did do a general manager role. I probably leveled out at the executive committee kind of roles within it, because I started to become and get more exposed to, both at that hotel and in New York, to how brands how the brand got involved with the hotel, right? Like, so I knew how we were creating experiences at our one hotel, but I started to see, oh, look, in this Crowne Plaza brand, they're rolling out a new program about a new sleep advantage program. And they have to think about not only how is it going to work at the Crowne Plaza Times Square, but how is it going to work at the Crowne Plaza Minneapolis and the Crowne Plaza Los Angeles. That's really interesting to think about how you communicate things that impact multiple different variables and different things. And so I started to offer up, my feedback or get involved on different projects with the brand team, is how I kind of made a bit of that bridge. I also had really strong mentorship, both, and mentors at all of those locations are people I still talk to on a daily basis. Just this morning, I talked to my mentor, who was the regional vice president when I was at the Crowne Plaza in Times Square. And she's also the one who said, Karen, you're going back to school. And I was like, oh, and actually, like, I'm, kind of busy. And later she's like, no, you've got time. You're going back to school. They'll never be able to take that away from you. You're going to go. So I got my master's when I was in New York at Fordham in adult education and HR development. And so, something now where people are like, really, I use my background in adult education every single day. Like, my job is about educating people on these brands, on how to do things, how to like evolve it. So it's like, you just, again, I would always say, like, listen to the people around you, are sometimes pushing you in different directions. And I do believe at some point I might use that educational degree in a different way. Like, if you think about a career of the future or something like that. So I'll put that on a shelf for later. And she's right. You can never take it away from you. So the world will always need teachers. But I thought that was the highest. And so I started to get involved and hear from different mentors and get involved in different projects. And I saw that there was this whole, world that helped lead these brands and support these brands at the center, at the corporate office. And so I worked to say, well, what would it take for me to get a role at the corporate office? And what would that look like? And where could I contribute? What my skills are, what I do really well. And that's how I transitioned to the corporate office in a global HR role, partnering with brands. And then I raised my hand when somebody on a brand team, I started just becoming more. Here's what I would say: when you start feeling yourself get more curious about, in a conversation, what somebody else is doing versus what you're doing. Like, when you're more curious about how Dan's going to take his project forward than yours, you start asking more questions, leaning in, trying to get exposure to that. That's when I've naturally felt my career rhythm kind of say, you're probably ready for, like, 5 or 6 years in operations, 5 or 6 years in HR. Like, you started to feel yourself gravitationally pull towards somebody else's project in the room. And I started to become more interested in what the actual brand leaders were doing and how are they developing consumer insights? How are they testing that? How are they putting things in that? And so a woman on the team was going on maternity leave, and I raised my hand and said, well, can I just cover for her? And I was like the girl from HR, and they were like, all right, you seem competent, you're paying attention in the meetings. What could go wrong in 4 months, right? And if it doesn't work
So
out, you go back.
much.
You go back, right? And I never went back. So that's
Wow.
That's kind of how it evolved. So I've been covering a maternity leave for a kid that I think just turned 15 or 16. Um, if I look
Wow.
back on time or whatnot. So yeah. But and then even over that, I've stayed in brand, but in different roles. And then over the past, 5, 6, 7 years now, as time goes on, I've been involved in launching, these brands, which honestly I think puts together a lot of my previous experience, right? Like if you're trying to launch a brand, you have to think about absolutely every aspect of the brand, and so it kind of forces me to draw upon every experience for that.
Well, I think also for me as a fan of hospitality and hotels, and
Oh, Dan, you're a super fan. You're not just a
I
fan. You're a super.
I'm not, I don't claim to be an expert really, and I think that's why I love doing this podcast so much, because I am a fan. And like you said, it's hearing other people's stories and leaning into them. I'm just super
Yeah,
curious. And
yeah,
but hotels, and you said hotels can give everyone so much exposure. It's because whether it's brand or HR or operations or some or a restaurant or a
yeah, yeah.
bar or
Meetings or
renting
conventions or
snowmobiles
yeah,
or meeting space,
yeah,
they are a platform for every kind of, well, maybe not every kind, but so many different kinds of small of businesses, and
oh yeah,
you can lean
yes,
into whatever
yes,
is
yes,
intriguing you the most. And I but oftentimes people don't have the mentor or don't know how to find the mentor,
yeah,
to ask those questions, or they're intrigued, but they're like, oh, how do I get
yeah,
there? And maybe they're not as wanting to take as many risks as you to ask. Sometimes people
yeah,
don't want to ask. So if you could share your experience from Mr. Hart to your other mentors, like how did you find these mentors, and were you ever nervous to ask, or how did you ask? Like, what's a good, if you were doing your adult education class on how to
yeah.
find and best use a mentor, what would you say? What would your syllabus be?
My syllabus for that. It's interesting because I reflect on those. They were formal in the sense of we had a working relationship. I worked with them, but they weren't like formal mentoring programs, or I wasn't like, hey, Anne, Katie, Sharon, will you mentor me? You know what I mean? It wasn't that formal,
It's like, will you
but
go out with me?
it was, yeah. Well, because we do talk in some of our formal
Yeah.
things, like find the mentor, ask them if they this, and those are wonderful too. Like, and those also have time and places. For me, I have found that when I'm in a space, I look for the person that I see that I admire the way in which they show up at work, the way in which they cut through problems, the way in which I've seen them do the right thing and advance their agenda and their career, like, right. And I'll usually like kind of find those in those instances. It was me then kind of saying, hey, I'm trying to get better in these couple areas, or hey, can I try, give me a shot trying to do X, Y, or Z. So I would say it's identifying the people that you look up to in a professional context, right? Because of who they are and what they bring to that
Mm.
experience, and also have a value that they can give to you as well, right? Because it's like you're trying to learn how to do something or advance something or show up in a different way. And also people who will tell it to you straight between the eyes. In all of those instances, they were people who also told me when I wasn't doing a very good job, or you could have done better, you know what I mean? Or here's how. If you really want to have that, this is what you need to be doing. And this is why you need to be going and getting your master's in this, even though you think you don't need to right now, or you want to put it off a year. Like they're the people who told you, tell it like it is. And so I think there's also, not just finding the people who say you're great and, you're going to do great things. It's like people also say you could actually be doing a lot better.
Mm. And then, so you've had these great mentors, officially or
Yep.
unofficially, over your years, but it's like, it's really what's intriguing me, who's showing up the best. I love that, because like you're drawn to, you're kind of modeling how you want to be. But then if you were to look at the other shoe, as now you've evolved and you've fallen forward to where you are now, how are you bringing on your mentees, if you will?
Yeah. So, a couple, and ISG is awesome. And yeah, I don't say that because I've worked for them. I've only worked for them, right? Like it's my career. So I always
What
say
is
like
that? It's like
I
the Stockholm syndrome,
thank
isn't
you.
that
You're
when
like,
you're
I
like
don't like when people are like something about other places. I'm like, what is that like? What is it like there? Like what it but like truly because I have
blink twice?
I know, right? No. You know, it's again, I love, I do, and I love IHG because of the people, and that's what when people come into our world from all these other places that they worked, and even when they leave the world, what they say all the time is it's the people, right? It's the
Hmm.
people, and that's a lot of what this brings. And so I'm excited. I'm actually leading our America's mentoring program for IHG right now. And I'm a sponsor for that. And we just kicked off we've got about 450 people that are involved in the mentoring program. And we pair them up either individually or pods. So I just had my kickoff last week with my pod. So I've got 4 people that are in my pod. But what I said to them is like, even in that first meeting, like just because I'm the quote unquote mentor in the group, 100% I'm going to be learning from all 4 of them. You know what I mean? That to me, we're just a group, right? We're just a group that's bringing things together in a forum where we can get to know each other better, push on things, push each other on our thinking. And so, one, it's my responsibility to continue to mentor other people, whether that's formal, but then I also have just the people who have worked on my teams in the past that I still connect with. But I think it's that it's like I know I'm the sponsor of the mentoring program, but I kind of said on our kickoff to the group, I said, whether you're carrying the title of mentee or mentor, we're both carrying the same title because you should be open to hearing and learning from what they're bringing to you as well. And vice versa. So, you know, no matter what it looks like, I think there's a big part of that. It's mutual, right?
And how many are in? So there's 450 mentors
Yeah.
and mentees who are
Yes.
mentoring each other.
Yes.
How many are in your pod? How many pods are there?
I have 4 people that are in my pod. So I'm the
So,
mentor, and there's 4 people that are in the group that are all at a similar level of director level within our organization.
mhm.
And
And
then we've got probably a couple hundred individual one-to-one mentoring, and then we've probably got about 40 or 50 people that are leading pods.
wow.
I'd love
Okay.
to for everyone to have a one-to-one, but the numbers, it starts getting hard,
Yeah.
right? And so then we did some pods too, which is
And then
great.
in your pod, is it people who are coming from the operations, human resources, brand, or is it like do they all kind of rhyme with each other?
All over. All
Wow.
different parts of the organization. So in the matchup, folks can say if they're really particular about wanting a certain matchup. But most people have said, you know, these are the things I'm interested in learning about. So our America's HR group has like crushed it with this program, and they have a full behind the scenes technology where you go on and put in here are the top 10 things I'm trying to learn about. And then mentors are saying, I'm really good at these 3 things. So if the person wants to grow in, you know, executive storytelling and communication and, you know, building out
Wow.
cost plans, a mentor might say, I'm really good at those 3 things. And then on the back end, we're trying to match the people up in the right way.
That's freaking amazing. Okay, so
It's
then if
like it's like a dating app, but
yeah.
professional,
So
right?
wait,
Like,
how does if you know, there's so many brands and employees for IHG
yeah,
across North America. Let's
yeah,
just look at that.
yeah.
Is it something they opt into? Is it
Yes,
an email? Like that's
totally
crazy.
opted.
That and
Yeah.
it's totally opt in. So I'm an IHG employee. I would have probably gotten an email like, do you want to be a mentor or be
Yes.
mentored?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's general communication, and then let's just say I apply then a more forceful communication to all of my leader cohort saying, this email said it's, you know, optional. I really encourage you to think about
Mm,
being a mentor because it's our job to continue to and make the time. That's what I say to people. You're not finding the time. Nobody has the time. Make the time because it's super important. So,
wow.
so I do a little bit of also marketing. We'll call it marketing
You're
as well.
volunteering people.
No, I'm not. It still is optional. It's
I'm
totally
just
optional. But you know, I just want people to think about it because if you don't give some of your time to that, I just really think it's a big part of what we do is
mm,
continuing to grow the talent, especially in an environment like ours, but it's so It's so a matrix organ, a big company, matrix company. We have some people who are out in the field and never come to the corporate office. How are they going to get exposure to other leaders to continue to grow their career if there aren't some of these channels to do it? Right? It's really easy to say reach out, and it's that's intimidating. So how do we
Wow.
need to create some of these opportunities for people to do that? And then it's up to the person to really own the opportunity, but we can at least set that up.
And for the people in your pod, where are they in Atlanta or are they spread out through North
They're
America?
actually my pod is all based in Atlanta. And so, we in our meeting last week we talked about really prioritizing an in-person meeting because not everybody's always in the office 5 days a week and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But the team is really trying to commit to how do we make the in-person connection come to life for these meetings because we feel like, the team feels like it's important. So of course we'll miss some people here, there, or whatever. It's okay. We can figure it out. But we're trying to do that
And
way.
then
But
and then with your pod, are they all from your three brands or are they from?
no.
Oh
All
wow,
different
okay.
groups. So we have people from our global guest experience team, people from our finance and performance assessment team, somebody who's leading the voice program, like which is all of our customer care centers and things like that,
So
technology. So it's
so it's
all
very
over.
varied. Okay, and then if you look at your pod right now, like envision them they're in front of you, what's the thread that ties them all together and you as a part of that is and weaves that fabric? What is it? You said the people earlier, but like
Yeah.
does it distill into something? I'm curious about that culturally.
Yeah. I think so. One, I think the thread of the group that I have and what we it was funny as we talked. I was actually looking, these are my notes from my pod meeting last week, are right here in front of me, where I was thinking about that as each person shared, because we just talked about like, who are we at work? Who are we outside of work? And what do we want to get out of this relationship, for the next year is what we kind of talked
Mhm.
about in our meeting there. And it was, even though those people all come from different backgrounds, they have way different goals and things that they're trying to achieve this year professionally. But across all of it, they really were looking to form deeper connections across that level, that director level, and also just be making sure that they were eyes wide open to how they help their teams continue to grow. So what I love is that they're also thinking about how do they use each other about helping their teams underneath them grow as well too. So I'd say a lot of connectivity, even though the actual work and what they're talking about is going to be very different. But at the end of the day, they're all people leaders. And so, how do we work together to make sure in this type of organization we are helping our people navigate that experience?
This is freaking amazing because aside from whatever investment was done to develop the platform, like the quote dating app of it, it actually is free to a huge organization, except for your time. Like you have to
Yeah,
dedicate your
yeah,
time to it. But
yeah.
the dividends this must pay as for IHG and individually for the individuals and
Well,
also for IHG, it must be enormous.
yeah. I mean, yeah. So I feel like there's no, we talk about things that have, what's the downside of it? I don't feel like there's a downside to this. It only further grows. And honestly, it also helps through these programs and connections. I think you also see we're able to really also identify people that might be ready for a role in a different part of the organization, but might not have even known that role existed. Again, it's about exposure and visibility, and they're just not able to see that. So and then just also like just connecting different dots across that helps teams get their work even done differently. So there really is a lot of positivity to it. And then also just I would say the general, like we talked about, 40 people just doing good things. Like I think that's just doing good things, right? Like
Yeah.
helping other people advance and grow helps the organization. We have a really ambitious agenda at IHG. We got 19 brands. It's a challenging environment, right? In the hotel space and the business. We need to put everything behind helping our people to also be better for guests and for owners in front of them. And so, it really is about it's about the people, but also is about, it's gonna bear dividends in a lot of different ways, right?
I think what's really surprising about this is much in the same way, like when Mr. Hart said, "Oh, go to London and do this," it was a surprise to you, right? But
Yeah.
in a way, IHG has managed to bottle that surprise and scale that surprise and actually make it not a surprise, but really, how do
Right.
you look inward to advance all these scores of other people, hundreds of other people, to help them fall forward? And like
Right.
you found all
Yeah.
these different paths. You're
Right.
basically creating a network where you can poke through
Yeah.
and try out other things and gain exposure, and that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Huh,
And
who
and
knew?
I said, yeah, I said before that like, oh, I didn't create formal. I will say I'm no surprise to you probably. I'm a pretty forward, outspoken person. I'm comfortable and confident to ask for what I need. My parents, I mean, this feedback goes back to kindergarten, like talk too much in class, you know what I mean? Like all the things, right? So it's been consistent feedback for me. So probably as I look back, I probably was more overt in forming some of those mentoring relationships than I'm probably giving, kind of credit to the story. But not everybody is inclined that way. And so having these types of programs does give people a safer way into finding a mentor if they're just not naturally inclined to identify
Yeah.
that, ask for it, look for it. Like there's a program for it. So
So everyone opt in, because you're missing out if you're not.
really, I mean, truly, you are missing out. I mean, I told my pod, I was like, we are the best pod. Um, we're totally winning this pod. No, now life is a competition, right? We're winning the metric pod.
Oh my God,
And no,
that's
like
hilarious.
it's fun, you can have fun with the group as well too.
So you're definitely pod number one.
I hope so. I mean, I'm the sponsor. We got to have a great pod, right? That's what I told
Yeah.
them. Like, come on, guys, we got a pod. We got a pod with the best of them. No, but
And by
they're
the end
thank
of it,
you.
you'll be
It was good
communicating
energy.
like you'll be communicating like dolphins, clicking,
Yes,
and you'll have a
hopefully,
telepathic
hopefully,
wavelength between each other.
yes, hopefully,
Um,
hopefully.
so with this journey, and now with all with how you're kind of creating all these halo effects, and helping other people fall forward, if you will. I like that fall
Mhm.
forward thing too. I'm using it a lot. Um, as you look to the future with your three brands, but IHG
Yes.
and you personally, like, what's exciting you the most?
Oh, that's a really great question. Honestly, I talked about it with my team last week, and then also with another group that I was with. I, These 3 brands that we get the again, the honor and the pleasure of working on are truly such a big part of what ISG's future growth story is going to be. So if we think about, we've been category leaders with brands like Holiday Inn, Holiday Inn Express, the future within those spaces within midscale, which is such a huge segment, you know what I mean? It's just growing gangbusters. And these 3 brands are really at the forefront of some of that future growth. And I think they really have carved out such unique designs, propositions, profiles for owners. So I think seeing them really grow in scale is what gives me excitement. Avid, we just opened our 71st. Avid launched in 2018, but opened the 71st, another 140 in the pipeline for that brand. We opened our third Atwell Suites a couple weeks ago in Austin at the Austin Airport, which is like such a great location. It's a conversion that just like you would not even believe what it looked like before. So that just really brings so much life to that brand. And then Garner Hotels, I think, launching that brand, getting on sale, and then having our first hotels within a couple months shows that the flywheel can really move for these brands, and that we have a really great team of people behind these owners to come launch these hotels, launch these brands, and get them performing in the marketplace. So honestly, I mean that's what really excites me.
Mm.
And there is, certainly that excitement behind our other brands at IHG, but personally talking to my team, and I was out with some owners a couple weeks ago talking to them too, and just their general excitement about building these brands. We also have a new Avid Hotel and Candlewood Suites dual brand prototype
Oh, those are
that
cool.
we have the first one of that opening in a couple weeks. And owners have been so excited by that. So imagine putting a strong transient brand like Avid Hotel, connecting that with a great extended stay brand like Candlewood Suites from an owner return perspective and operating. I mean, that's going to be awesome to see that get out in the
Mm.
marketplace as well. So yeah, that's what
So
excites
growth.
me. Growth. Yeah. Growth,
So,
growth, growth.
and you said Avid opened in 2018. You said.
Yep. Our first Avid opened in 2018.
and now you have 71 and you want to get to 140. Atwell, you have 3. Where do you want to get there in the medium term?
So we have 140 Avids in the pipeline. We want to
Oh,
get to a
140 in the
much
pipeline.
bigger number than that as well. On Avid, we've got, on Atwell Suites, we've got another 40 that are in the pipeline, but we see that brand also
Wow.
scaling in the next 10 years in the hundreds. And then on
And
Garner,
Garner.
we see that brand getting to 500 hotels in the coming years. I mean, so
Wow.
these are scale brands for the future. You know what I mean? It's how do we continue to
Jeez.
grow them? And then Garner, we also signed. We've got 3 hotels in Osaka, Japan, that are going to convert to Garner by the end of this year. And the team in Europe, Middle East, and Africa has been out there selling this brand actively because the conversion opportunity is not just here. Those conditions that we talked about from a finding real estate, financing, all that goes with it. Those are not just US trends. Like those are things that are happening globally. So there's a ton of interest in the Garner brand around the world as well. So that's
Wow.
also, what excites me. We're on sale in Mexico and in Canada now also for Garner. And so we were down in Mexico City a couple weeks ago talking to owners there. I've got a team member flying down there this week to take a look at what the breakfast menu might look like. How are some of the hallmarks going to come to life? So that's also what keeps it energizing is just thinking about, the scale of it, not just here, but around the world.
That's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea it was growing that much. Okay, cool. Should have put that in the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, that's why we do this, right?
Wow. Oh,
Things move.
wow. Okay. When you were at Cornell, were you did you work in the Statler Hotel?
I did. I worked at the front desk and also in reservations and also on the PBX.
Oh, oh
Like the
wow.
phone operator. Yeah, like that's
Yeah.
that's how. Yeah, again, 40 over 40. I'm old. I'm an old lady, Dan. So I would answer the phone. Yeah, and transfer the calls.
What was your favorite job while at the Statler at Cornell?
My favorite job at Cornell. Honestly, I would say working at the front desk because it was such a rich. The reservations and the PBX was like my Sunday 3 to 11 shift. You probably had a long weekend out and you really just needed to sit behind that terminal and just take a few
Yeah.
phone calls. If I'm honest, I was phoning it in on the Sunday 3 to 11. But no, the front desk was great because think about it, you had prospective students coming in to stay at the hotel. You had people that were coming to lecture at different parts of the Cornell just brought in so many different people for so many different reasons that it just was always like, what brings you here? Which is always the great question to ask if you work at the front desk, was just always a different answer. So
Mm,
I'd say that was probably the favorite there.
cool. And then what was your favorite thing to order from the hot truck?
Oh God. Just the straight up pizza one. Just like what would they call that? Oh, I'm blanking on the name, but yes, I definitely stood many late nights at the hot truck. Yes,
Good.
hot truck.
Okay, now if the Karen Gilbride that I'm speaking to right now were to magically be checking in at the Statler to your younger self, what advice would you have for your younger self?
Pay much better attention in financial accounting. I know, like it's pay deeper attention. You know what I mean? In all of the classes, quite honestly, like across it is like, you start to become interested in everything else, but it's like pay attention and pay it and challenge yourself even in school just to even branch out further into topics you don't think are interesting to you at that point. You know what I mean? I thought at that point I would stay in the operation side versus, like, I joke, but really there was a ton of really rich real estate and investment classes that were offered, but I was like, I know my direction. I'm going to stay over here, like, because it's a wonderful school where you can really get focused in and like, but you kind of like let that out and then you're like, well, now that would have been much more helpful than having to learn it on my own. So
Totally. You should have been, like it says behind you, be curious about those
to be
courses that,
curious, I was
yeah.
curious. I was curious in introduction to wines, and then also I was over taking psychology classes in the psych school. My dad's like, "Aren't we paying for you to be in the hotel school?" I'm like, "But I want to see it all. I want to learn it all. It's such a cool place." So learning how to cook, I mean, all of it. So
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been quite a surprising and illuminating conversation for me, especially on the mentor side. Like that was amazing. It's also really exciting all the things that you're doing with Garner, Atwell, and Avid, and just IHG in general. So I just want to say thank you for your time and getting to know you a little bit better. Thank
Oh,
you.
well, thank you. I so appreciate your curiosity too. Thank you.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
and let's be curious. And everyone
Yeah.
else, if this has sparked your curiosity, in there we go. How's that?
Yep.
And also, if just the need to take on a mentor or be a mentee to someone, if it helped you think a little bit different, please pass it along. We grow by word of mouth, and it's really exciting to be able to do these conversations. So thank
Yeah.
you, thank you, thank you. And Karen, if people wanted to get in touch with you or learn more, where do they? How do they do that?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to learn about any of our brands, please go to IHG.com. A ton of resources out there across all the brands that we talked about. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn if you have any particular questions or feedback or anything like that. I'm out there.
Well, thank you. And thank you for sharing your career journey and just all the cool things you're up to.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you.